And then travel and then move to Lopez. I thought that it was back to the after COVID, they just called it back. They said, this is a project. So, but I don't know how he works in centers. But he just showed me a picture of the greenhouse that you just go with a 2 day. Yeah.
All right, I think we're gonna get started, everybody. For our friends on Zoom, can you hear me okay? You thumbs up? We get lots of thumbs up. Okay, great, great. Well, welcome everybody to the library. We're back. So my name is Darren Horner. I'm the director of the Lopez Island Library. A month into it now, and I can't be more thrilled than to have adults together in this library. This is the first adult program in person that we've had since 2020, I believe.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. So we're here today. We're going to have a really nice discussion between Lorna and Iris, who they'll do some introductions to herself. And I just want to note that we have this incredible new book that Lorna put together as the first Washington State Ferry. Sorry, Iris. I'm staring at. I apologize. As the Washington State Ferries writers in residence, the very first one.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm going to turn it over to them, but I just wanted to welcome everybody into the library. I wanted to also welcome all our Zoomers who are joining us virtually. I wanted to thank Malia for making this whole hybrid event possible. We're looking forward to doing a lot more of these. Thank you, Malia. And then also, I really wanted to make sure that we thank the Friends of the Lopez Island Library who help support our programs beyond what the library budget can provide. In particular, in this case, they're helping taking care of our Zoom subscription, which they've done over the last 2 years for COVID, and really helped us reach a lot of people in the community when we couldn't gather together. So thanks. Are any Friends people here tonight? If not, thank you, the Friends.
Yes.
Overall. Right, so a couple of the things here. I think the last thing I want to mention is that there is going to be a Q&A at the end of this. So Malia will, for all you Zoomers out there, if you have a question, put it into the chat, and Malia will be monitoring that to make sure that your questions can also get answered here as well. All right, well, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Laura.
Thank you. I'm not used to it. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I have Iris. And I've got a few other things to add. What?
I don't think your mic is on.
I have.
It's muffled.
You leave it. Is that okay?
Put it right by your mouth.
Like an ice cream cone. Okay. I have Iris's bio, which I'm going to read, and then I'm going to tell you a few little things that aren't on the bio. Iris Graville writes essays, memoir, and profiles, and has been published in national and regional journals. She's also the publisher of Shark Reef Literary Magazine, of which I'm one of the founders and past editors. Iris's third book, the memoir Hiking Naked, received a Nautilus Book Award. This was in 2017. Other titles include Bounty, Lopez Island Farmers, Food and Community, Surrounding, and Hands at Work, Portraits and Profiles of People Who Work with Their Hands. In 2018, Iris was the first writer in residence for the Washington State Ferries. That residency helped fuel her latest book, Writer in a Life Vest, Essays from the Salish Sea. A retired nurse and environmental and anti-racism activist, Iris has lived with her husband, Jerry, on Lopez Island since 1996, also with her son and daughter, Matthew and Ray, who's here. Now, I have a few memories about meeting Iris because back in the fall of 1997, I took a writing course with Ali Smulders over on Shaw And after that 8-week course or so, a couple of us decided we were going to have a writing group here on Lopez. And so we had a first meeting, and one of the women, Lori Harrison, brought along Iris Graville. She said, Iris is a writer too. I think she was working at the coffee shop at the time.
Probably.
Yeah, so this was in like 1998. So Iris and I have known each other now for 24 years, and we've been in a writing group together for 24 years. So all during that time, I remember Iris's verbs weren't that great in the beginning. She used a lot of passive voice. She doesn't do any of that now. She is one of the greatest verb users that I know. I also was there when she decided that she was going to give her best time to her writing. Instead of squeezing it in at the end of the day or some other time, she decided to give it 10 to 2. And she blocked that out on her calendar. And I think it made such a difference for her. Everything started to really come together after that. I was there when she started her blog, Writer by Convincement. This was over in Shaw when our writing group had retreats over there. We were all standing behind the computer when Iris pushed the button with her first blog entry. So great. And I remember too critiquing sections of Hands at Work Long Distance when you and Jerry were in Mexico for several months, I think, learning Spanish. So we've been doing this together for a very long time. Now, I think it would be good, Iris, if you started by reading something from your introduction.
Well, but first I have to introduce you, Anna.
Okay.
Turnabout is fair play. So you know of this long history that we have. And as Lorna mentioned, she is the founder, one of the founders of Shark Reef Literary Magazine. And I've had the pleasure to work with her and some of the other editors on that magazine now for 20 plus years.
Yeah.
As she said, you know, we've been on this long writing journey together. Lorna has probably, after me, she has read more words than I've written than anybody else has, multiple times. And any of you who are writers know how important it is to have people who can really give you good critique. And I have several members of my writing group here. We now have a name. We're the Women Writers of the Salish Sea, the WWSS. And we meet every week. And so I thank all of you for the help that you've given me with my various writing projects. And when we talked about having this launch event here, I thought it would be interesting for people if we had some kind of dialogue. I'll do some reading of excerpts from the book, but just to have some conversation as well. And so Lorna graciously accepted to be my conversation partner. I also want to thank Darren and Malia for this. This is my first event for Writer in a Life Vest. We did have a signing event at the bookshop the other day, but this is my official launch. And so thank you to you all for making it possible. We haven't known for months just what form this might take. And I'm really grateful we can do this hybrid form. And I know that all the library staff got recruited into helping prepare for this. So thanks to all of them. I also want to acknowledge Homebound Publications. It's a small indie press based in Connecticut for the moment, although moving to the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And I have worked with them both for Hiking Naked and now this book. And Leslie Browning is the founder of that press. And I can't imagine a better small press of any press of any size to work with. Leslie and staff have just been fantastic. And it's really been a good home for the kind of writing that I do that often is based in nature and has some spiritual elements to it. But best of all, I really like their tagline, assuring that the main stream isn't the only stream. I also want to thank the crew of the Inter-Island Ferry. You'll hear more about them. My family, my husband and daughter are here. As far as I know, my son and sorry, I hoped I could get through this evening without tears, but you know, it's an emotional experience. But hopefully my son and daughter-in-law in Chicago are with us also by Zoom. And I also want to thank all who work to protect the Salish Sea, and there are a bunch of you here tonight. And before I read from the book's introduction, as Lorna asked, I am going to read, this is the first time I've ever done this in a book. I wrote an acknowledgement, a land acknowledgement. So I want to read that. It's not just pertains to this book, but to where we are now. So this is my acknowledgement of America's First Peoples. I acknowledge I reside on the ancestral lands and waters of Coast Salish peoples who have called this place home and cared for it from time immemorial. I wrote these essays on traditional lands and waters of Coast Salish tribes. I express my deepest respect and gratitude for these original and current caregivers and healers of this region. I also acknowledge the disposition of Indigenous lands was often taken by coercive and violent acts in the disregard of treaties. I regret the harm done to First Nations people by colonizers, of which I'm a part. For that, I extend sincere apologies, and I pledge to work toward reconciliation. So now, you want me to read from the introduction?
Yeah, I think it's always good to start at the beginning.
Right. Well, this is an excerpt from where the book begins. As an islander, I spend considerable hours on the Salish Sea, sometimes in a kayak, but primarily on the Washington State ferries, the largest ferry system in the nation and third largest in the world. The fleet carries nearly 25 million people a year through some of the most majestic scenery on Earth. While ferries are my connection to the mainland, the inter-island route travels among only 4 islands in the San Juans. You all know this: Lopez, Shaw, Orcas, and San Juan, but there may be some on Zoom who don't know. Over the years, that circuit has supplied time and space for me to write. During an outing with a friend on the inter-island in the spring of 2017, she recalled blog posts I'd written on the vessel during my twice-weekly commute to neighboring Orcas Island. For 5 years, I worked there as the school nurse. One of my favorite blogs of yours, my friend volunteered, was about riding the ferry. I wouldn't realize until later that her comment had lodged in my mind. While I wrote short blog essays during my comings and goings to Orcas, I mostly worked on my 3rd book, Hiking Naked, A Quaker Woman's Search for Balance. Homebound Publications published the memoir in the fall of 2017. As I offered readings and events to promote it, someone in the audience always asked, "What are you working on now?" I was clearer about what I didn't want to write, a sequel or anything else about myself, than what I did. At the same time, my concerns about climate change in general and the health of the Salish Sea in particular grew. I wasn't alone. People throughout the islands and indeed the world were becoming increasingly aware of the threat to ecological disasters. I'd studied the effects of warming waters and sea level rise. I knew southern resident killer whales, also known as orca whales, neared extinction due to toxins and plastics in the water, vessel noise, and a 60% reduction in their main source of nutrition, Chinook or king salmon. I'd seen evidence of sea star wasting. I'd read that 30% of birds and 38% of mammals are listed as threatened, endangered, or candidates for these designations. I'd written agencies and government officials to urge them to prevent the risk of spills from increased oil transit. I became certain it was time to focus my writing on protecting and preserving the water and life that surrounded my home. Doing some of that writing while drifting on the Salish Sea would undoubtedly influence and enhance my work. My friend's earlier praise likely stimulated thoughts of a year-long writing residency on the Interim ferry. As I considered the notion, it surfaced as a way to do my small part to protect this ferocious, fragile place. I floated the idea with a retired ferry boat captain and member of the ferry advisory committee, and Captain Kenny's here tonight. He encouraged me to develop a proposal and submit it to a contact of his in the Washington State ferry system. My proposal outlined the overall goal, a book-length collection of personal essays. I anticipated exploring history and details about the inter-island route and the MV Tillicum, the vessel in service at the time for the inter-island circuit, and describing the Salish Sea and the effects of climate change on it and southern resident killer whales. The structure of the inter-island residency was simple. I planned to walk, not drive, onto the ferry on Lopez Island with my laptop, journal, and research materials, and then ride, write, and read along the route. There would be no cost to me or the ferry system. The inter-island is the only route that allows walk-on passengers to ride free. From August 1, 2018 until August 30th, 2019, I served as the Washington State Ferry System's first writer in residence on the inter-island ferry. A crisp white table tent with my name in black lettering and the WSF logo in blue identified me and my role. It took far longer than one term to complete this book, but many pieces had their beginnings at a table on the MV Tillicum, floating and sometimes pitching port to starboard, past rocky shorelines, snowy mountain ridges, forests of cedars, firs, and madrones, mansions and mobile homes. Seagull and eagle calls, briny wind currents, and tingling sea breezes stimulated my senses. This is a collection of nonfiction essays written not by a scientist or marine biologist, but by a storytelling lover of the Salish Sea. Most of the essays are in a form sometimes referred to as lyric. I use techniques of both prose and poetry to explore topics I might not otherwise approach, and to lead readers to ask questions. I offer them as symbols of resilience, inspiration, and hope. That's how it begins.
Yes, that's how it is. Is it okay if I say something else before the question? I'm just picturing that photo of you on the boat with the little table tent that says writer in residence. And I'm remembering that when we first came to the island, Leonard, my husband, and I, we were always outside, looking around, and then we'd see people writing, reconciling their checkbooks or doing other things. We thought, why aren't, here we are in this place and nobody's looking outside. And so, I'm sorry that came to me though. I just thought about that. It's a wonderful memory, because we ended up doing that too.
Right. Well, plus I also had the benefit of, as those of you who write know, you do have to look up now and then from your work and look at what I had to look at.
Yeah.
Because there were windows all around.
So Writer in a Life Vest is full of scientific and environmental facts and figures, interviews with experts in various fields. Yet it's beautifully approachable, even entertaining. I wonder how you grappled with being a concerned resident and not a scientist when you were writing this book. Is that an issue that weighed on you?
It certainly did weigh on me. Many times I asked myself, who am I to write this? And one impetus for me in doing this project was that after, at that point, living here for 25 years, I was painfully aware of how ignorant I was of the waters around me and the life around me. And I was feeling really compelled to learn more about that. And no better way to learn about something. It's kind of like, if you teach something, that's when you really learn about it. Well, in a way, I'm hoping that this book teaches people, but such impetus for me to learn more about it. And also to kind of assuage my worry about the fact that I, don't have the credentials, the science credentials to do it. And I often questioned if this was my work to do, which I tend to do about my work in general. And I wondered if I had anything different to say that would be helpful, because there's certainly been a lot written about the Salish Sea and the climate crisis. So, I did have those big questions, and often when I do have big questions, I write about those questions, as I did in the collection's title essay. So I thought I could read a little bit from that. So the title essay is Writer in a Life Vest. A crew member called out as the Tillicum sat in the berth in Friday Harbor after all the passengers had disembarked. "The writer is still on board," she said. "It's Iris," another replied. "Iris is the writer." I left the table where I usually wrote on the ferry to find crew members Terry and Suzanne discussing my presence. "We're going to have a fire drill," Suzanne said. "Just wanted to warn you." A few seconds later, a bell sounded, a long jangle, lower in tone than a classic telephone ring, and about 10 decibels louder. I returned to my writing spot to watch what would unfold. Terry trotted to a passenger bench near the outdoor deck and lifted the vinyl-covered seat. She pulled 2 orange life vests from the stash and walked toward me. "You can be my guinea pig," she said, handing me one of the vests. As she donned the other, she instructed me to loosen the side straps on mine, remove my glasses, slide the vest over my head, and tug the straps for a snug fit. "If you ever have to jump into the water," she explained, "hold onto the top of the vest so it doesn't ride up, and cross your legs at the ankles." I gulped, then mimicked her actions in the cabin as I watched a spray of water shoot out of a fire hose over the ferry's port side. "Bring your knees to your chest to conserve energy," Terry continued. "Or if you see a log, you could drape your knees over it." I nodded silently and swallowed again. After Terry took a photo, I removed the bright, uncomfortable life-saving equipment, grateful this was only a drill. Wearing that vest, I felt a combination of peril and protection. 3 shorter, echoing jangles signaled the drill's conclusion. "If we have a real emergency," Terry said, "you can help." As I returned to my desk, Suzanne strode through the cabin, dressed in full firefighting gear, yellow helmet with a plastic face shield, bulky yellow jacket and pants, thick gloves, and black boots. She'd been wielding the fire hose on the upper deck. "We do these drills once a week," she explained, perspiration glistening her face. I thought of varied kinds of vulnerability Terry, Suzanne, and I can feel in our work. They put their lives at risk when there's a fire or some other emergency on board. When I write, particularly personal essays, my risk is different, but present nonetheless. Often my heart feels especially unprotected, as if it's covered with only the thinnest layer of skin and no sternum. Most writers I know describe the same sense of bearing heart and soul. Every time I wrote on the Tillicum or in my home office, fears about the imperiled Salish Sea stalked me. The deaths in 2018 of 2 southern resident orcas, J50 or Scarlet, and a calf born to J35, Tahlequah, brought worldwide attention to the impact of pollution, noise, and diminishing food sources on these mammals. Tahlequah gave birth to a healthy male calf, J57 or Phoenix, in September 2020. However, the mortality rate for infants is 50% due to high levels of toxins in whale mother's breast milk. Like the spotted owl, endangered by over-harvesting old-growth forests, the potential extinction of orca whales demands protection by humans, as well as a halt to our damaging behaviors. I'm no marine biologist, but I'm compelled to use my art to write about the sea, the threats to its survival, and the protection measures many people resist. Still, I couldn't help asking myself whether I had the authority to write about these issues. Sometimes I've yearned for a bulletproof vest, like actor Nathan Fillion's in the television show Castle. Gillian played Rick Castle, a novelist and part-time detective with NYPD. Whenever Castle joined the real detectives on a criminal investigation, he zipped up a black vest emblazoned with the word writer in white letters. After the fire drill on the ferry, I recalled the snug fit of that life vest and imagined it giving me the confidence to expose my beliefs, fears, angers, and joys on the page. We're in a real emergency, and Terry said I could help. The truth is, the climate crisis endangers everyone, and we all need metaphorical life vests. I hope mine will sustain me to foster hope and give me the courage to speak. Southern resident whales, Chinook salmon, rockfish, anemones, urchins, sea stars, puffins, marbled merlets, they're as desperate for life vests as we are.
I just have this image of all of them wearing little life vests. I just have this image of them all wearing little life vests. Well, another major achievement, I think, in this book, Iris, is that you challenged yourself. You challenged yourself with different essay forms. There's a braided essay. There's one where you tell a tale with numbers. There's an imagined interview with Rachel Carson and Greta Thunberg. And all of these forms lend so much variety to the essays. I wonder how you landed there, and was there a particular point to this approach?
Well, the essay has really come a long way from what many of us grew up with of understanding an essay. Those papers we had to write in high school and college, and followed a very strict form. At least for the last 20 years, probably even longer, people have been experimenting a lot more with that form. And you know, I think it's also kind of a sign of the times that flash nonfiction and hybrid writing, even before we had hybrid events, were gaining popularity. I think we've all gone through quite a transformation with shorter forms because of the ways communication are happening these days. And it's something that I have studied and I have enjoyed reading these different styles. And I felt that trying some different forms, although there are some more standard type personal essays in this collection, that, you know, I was touching some places that clearly I've shown touch me in my heart, and and there were some hard things to say, and that some different forms might be a way to approach that. So you all can be the judge of whether that worked. So Lorna mentioned some of the different forms that I used in the collection. I was really trying to, I mean, the essay is so classic because it's a way to really ask questions and explore and try to make sense of something. And I was trying to do that. I was trying to figure out a lot about the Salish Sea in this project. I decided I would, as I was thinking of, you know, what things I wanted to write about, there were some topics that seemed to lend themselves to some different styles. Or as I was trying to figure out what it was I was trying to say, they would lend themselves to something that is not your standard, you know, opening argument and your explanations and then rehashing that. The one I want to read an excerpt from is an example of that. It was actually one that I wrote in a call for pieces for an anthology called For Love of Orchids. And after I wrote it, I felt like it would be a good piece to include in this collection. And it grew out of some of the studying I was doing about the Salish Sea and the numbers I was encountering, you know, to describe the Salish Sea and what was happening with climate change. And numbers are not my medium. And words are, but there was just something about these numbers that really struck me that I felt needed, I needed some kind of forum that I could really give attention to these numbers. And then that got me thinking about, the word count, and that led me to account and accounting, and account can be a noun, it can be a verb. And anyway, you can imagine how it goes from there. And so I wrote this piece that I titled Salish Sea Account. And I wanted the numbers to have some dominance. And you can't see that all this well, but each line starts with a number, and it allowed me to use numbers that were dates and distances, and well, you'll see as I read this excerpt. But I wanted something that would also be strong visually, and I thought the numbers would do that. So this is Salish Sea Account. It begins with an epigraph by Greta Thunberg, the environmental activist from Sweden. Every single person counts, just like every single emission counts. Every single kilo, everything counts. Account, noun. Report, story, log, tally, balance sheet, debt. 2009, the year the US Board on Geographic Names adopted the name Salish Sea to pay tribute to the first inhabitants of the region, the Coast Salish peoples. 7,000 square miles, the total marine area of the Salish Sea. These inland waters include Washington State's Puget Sound, Strait of Juan de Fuca, the San Juan Islands, and the Strait of Georgia. 8 million people live and work beside the Salish Sea. 76 southern resident killer whales, orcas, live in J, K, and L pods in the Salish Sea as of 2/18/21, down from 86 when they were first listed as endangered in 2005. And as of today, there are 74. 30 Chinook salmon are typical in an orca's daily diet. J35, also known as Tahlequah, is a 20-year-old orca whose newborn calf survived for only 30 minutes on 7/24/18. 17, the number of days Tahlequah carried the 400-pound body of her dead calf through the sea. 1,000 miles, the distance Tahlequah traveled the Salish Sea with her pod while pushing her dead calf. J50, also known as Scarlet, the latest southern resident to die on 9/13/18. On account of, owing to, due to, as a consequence of. 3 main threats to southern residents: insufficient salmon, toxic water, noise pollution. 4 dams on the lower Snake River impede Chinook salmon migration to breeding habitat. 130,000 adult salmon and steelhead returned to the Snake River to spawn in the 1950s. In 2017, there were less than 10,000. $3.6 billion US spent by the Canadian government to buy Kinder Morgan's Trans Mountain Pipeline. The goal, to expand transport of low-grade tar sands oil from Alberta, Canada to refineries in Northwest Washington. 7 times more oil tankers, each holding 25 million gallons of tar sands oil mixed with volatile organic diluents, including benzene, will travel the Salish Sea if the Trans Mountain Pipeline expands. 0 chance to clean up tar sands oil and protect first responders and marine life from toxic chemicals when tankers spill. 96 commercial whale watching boats operated in the Salish Sea in 2015, up from 63 in 1999. And now there are 111 whale watching boats. Accountable, Adjective, responsible, liable, comprehensible, understandable. 1, Canadian Federal Court of Appeal overturned approval of the Trans Mountain Oil Pipeline expansion because the federal government failed to adequately consult First Nations. 44, state, tribal, provincial, and federal officials served on Washington Governor Inslee's Southern Resident Orca Task Force. After 2 years of work, in 2019, the task force presented 49 recommendations that will lead to better water quality, a healthier ecosystem, and more robust salmon runs. They dedicated the final report to Tahlequah and to the 2 new orca calves born in 2019, L124 and J56. Countless, the efforts to pay our overdue debt to Tahlequah, her calf, and the Salish Sea.
I've noticed a lot of magazines, well, some magazines do this now too. I've noticed some magazines do this now too. They use numbers to make a point. Yeah, it's a very, very strong and compelling way to get a message across without really having to go into it in depth. It tells a very strong story. So I think it might be time for something that's a little less heavy. And I know you're not going to read this one, but there's one that's a song. And maybe you can just explain a little bit about that, even though they won't get to hear it here.
Right.
And then go into.
Okay, another lighter one.
Yeah.
Sure. How many of you know the MTA song? The is it Massachusetts Transit Authority? Great old folk song. You know, will he ever return? No, he'll never return. Well, when I was a writer in residence, one day on my route, it was a very cold day, and I decided uncharacteristically to get off the ferry on San Juan and go get some coffee at the Bean Coffee Shop. And as I walked in, I heard the clerk say, "Well, Penn's ferry dock is closed." And it turned out that many of you will remember that there was such a freeze that the ferry dock froze, and so they couldn't land the ferry, so they were bypassing Lopez. So there I was stuck, so I parodied the MTA song, wrote the WSAF song to tell the story of, will she ever return? The writer on the Inter-Island Ferry, will she ever return? Those of you who live in the San Juans will have an opportunity to hear that be sung by a real singer-songwriter on orcas. I'm going to do an event there, and Tom Rawson, who is a fantastic folk singer and songwriter, agreed to sing that along with his own Snake River Dam song. So I can't remember off the top of my head when that is, but it's coming up in May, I believe. So anyway, that was a fun way to let people know, you know, a little bit of what life is like when you're reliant on the ferry. And you all here know that, and many of the people in the audience, but you know, for other people, the whole idea that, oh, I ended up being stranded there till midnight, and it was just a fun way to relate that.
Iris, Tom says that it's on April 21st.
Oh, great. Thank you. Tom's in the Zoom audience, April 21st. Thank you, Tom, at the Orcas Library. Lorna mentioned that my first book was called Hands at Work, and I wrote profiles of people who work with their hands. And I really love that form of the profile of, you know, telling someone's story, letting their story be the focus. And so I wanted to include some profiles in this collection. And so I'm going to read an excerpt from one of those. It's called Everybody Loves a Pooping Whale. Dr. Deborah Giles knows how to get an audience's attention. She often grabs it with magnificent slides of southern resident killer whales swimming in pods, diving for salmon, or gathering in breeding ceremonies. Sometimes it's the devastating statistics she reports about dwindling numbers of the southern residents in the Salish Sea that lead people to scribble notes. The best proclamation I've heard her make, though, was in a video recording of her talk at the World Salmon Forum in Seattle in 2019. Quote, "Everybody loves a pooping whale." The video picked up chuckles from the crowd, but Giles's serious look remained unchanged until she explained the significance of whale stool. "It means you have an eating whale," she said with a smile. It turns out Giles, she goes by her last name, knows a lot about whale poop. She serves as a research biologist for the University of Washington's Center for Conservation Biology. The program was the brainchild of Dr. Sam Wasser, Giles told me during a Zoom interview from her home office in 2021. In 1997, he started to use scent detecting dogs to locate fecal samples of endangered species. Wasser, director of the UW Center for Conservation Biology, had done similar work in the redwoods with spotted owls. Through his Conservation Canines program, he collaborated with Sergeant Barbara Davenport, master canine trainer with the Washington State Department of Corrections. The pair modified narcotics detection dog methods to train dogs to locate stool from threatened and endangered species. Wasser compares the dog's ability to detect a specific scent to one of us being able to taste a teaspoon of sugar in 1,000,000 gallons of water. In an interview on CNN in December 2020, Giles described scat scouting work as consisting of a 3-being team. It's a coordinated dance between the dog reacting to a scent, the handler being able to interpret that change in body behavior of the dog, and then the boat driver really being in tune with not only the dog and the handler, but also all of the other things associated with being on the water. Dogs never have to go near any endangered animals, Giles said, and the feces yield much information about the whale's health. We can measure DNA, diet, hormones, pathogens, toxicants, and pregnancy non-invasively. Giles didn't hesitate when I asked her about one of the most important lessons she's learned as a conservation biologist. "We've damaged the environment," she said, "and the responsibility to repair it is entirely up to us." She also suggested we should be more like the southern residents. They give us an example of a more pure way of living in the natural world. They hunt collaboratively, care for each other when another is sick, literally hold each other up. We could learn from the whale's deep, deep sense of family and community. That seems like something else everybody could love.
I'm not going to get used to this. I want my own little, like I said. Well, we're getting to the end of this, I think. And so there are so many exceptional essays in your book. Writing space available is a fun one. She has postcards from Wales in the book, and the title essay. So you've got so many good things to choose from. So I'm wondering how you'd like to close this event before we open it up to questions.
Well, I'd like to close with a short piece called Lessons. It comes in the last section of the book on hope. And I want to read it in a celebration of J37. One thing in the book is I've used both the scientific name, the numbering system that the scientists use for the whales, and then the Whale Museum facilitates a process whereby people can give a name to each whale. I use both of those in the pieces, and it isn't always smooth, but it just seemed to me to be really important to use both of those designations. I want to read this last piece in celebration of J37, Heiska, and that's a straight Salish word meaning blessing or thank you. And Heiska, I believe is the correct pronunciation. And Heiska's baby, who was first seen just March 1st, and that's J59. I have not seen yet if the sex has been identified or if another name has been given, but this is for Heiska and J59. It's called Lessons. And it's in 4 parts. Number 1, our time. On the first vessel run of the inter-island route this autumn day, I gather with deckhands in the ferry galley after the final trucks and cars are loaded. Some of the crew pump steaming coffee out of a tall black thermos on the counter. Talk today is about enjoying the quiet of the morning now that the tourists have returned home and most of the drivers and walk-ons are regulars. This is our time now, and I feel that sense of entitlement. Our time, our boat, our Salish Sea. 2, ownership. I fuss and fume silently over the sense of ownership, and I wonder, who owns the sea? What does the sea own? Why do we even put any thought into owning what is just here, available and necessary for us, although we aren't so necessary for it? Except now that we've destroyed so much of the life below and above the waterline. 3, imagination. In my imagination, I follow you, Orchinus Orca, as you dive deeper into the sea than I've ever been before, into a darkness darker than I've ever known, so dark I can barely see your white eye patch gleaming against your silky black skin, and I can only feel the other creatures under the water, swimming with you and with me, creatures you know well, but I'm just getting to know even though they're here all the time, at least for now. 4, renewal. In the Tillicum's main cabin, signs with red letters and diagrams explain the steps in case of an emergency. For the Salish Sea and for us, the emergency alarm has already been sounded. We need to take lessons from the orca pods. Travel together in tight groups, some swimming and diving ahead in search of food to pass along to those with fewer reserves. Sleep together in a cove in moonlight. Celebrate being back together after a time apart. Carry our dead as long as we need to, mourn their loss, and then somehow return to frolic. And maybe feel a glimmer of renewal, of hope to carry on.
That's lovely, and I do want to ask you one quick short question. And that is, I think a lot of people might know this, but maybe not the Zoomers. To whom is this book dedicated?
Oh, it's dedicated to Maggie, my granddaughter. She's probably in bed by now because it's 8:30 in Chicago almost, and that's her bedtime. But it's to Maggie and symbolically her generation and the next generation and next generations, hopefully.
Yeah.
Thank you. Before we do questions, I did want to remind people where you can find Writer in a Life Vest. For those of you here, there are copies here that will be available afterwards. They're also available at Lopez Bookshop or your local independent bookseller, Lopez Island Library, or check with your local library, and then Homebound Publications online store. And I just want to note, Homebound is called a tree ambassador with a group called One Tree Planted. For every book they sell in their online store, Homebound plants a tree, or somebody from that group plants the tree. And it's also available wherever books are sold.
And I'd like to encourage all of you to write reviews of Iris's book on Goodread, Barnes and Noble, Amazon, wherever you can, because it would be good if more of the world knew about this book and had a chance to enjoy it the way that we have. So, questions. Somebody always is going to have a good question.
I think Malia is going to handle if there are any in the chat, and Lorna can handle questions.
We have one that's come into the chat so far, Judy. Oh, first I wanted to tell you, Iris, that I just saw Maggie's face on the screen.
For those of you who haven't met Maggie, if you visit my Facebook page or my blog, there happen to be a few pictures of her.
She's got dimples in each
Dimples.
cheek.
Yes.
Best
Hi,
smile in the
Maggie.
world.
Okay, so we have a question from Judy, who was curious about how passengers reacted to your presence on the ferry. And did you find their presence inspirational or a disturbance?
A variety of reactions. As I explained, I had this, the state ferries actually made a little nameplate for me with the WSF logo and my name. It said writer in residence, and I would set that out there, and I'd have my laptop and my notebook and other books and my coffee. And a lot of people would walk by and they'd kind of look and they'd just keep walking. And some people would walk by and they'd look and then stop and come back and what is the writer in residence? And often the people who stopped to talk were writers themselves, and they would say, wow, how'd you get to be the writer in residence? And I'd like to do that. A lot of people just completely ignored me. I had a sign-up sheet for, I did a newsletter, and so I had a sign-up sheet that people could stop and sign that up, or sign up for that. And so we would often get into conversations, and in one of my pieces, I list some of the characteristics of the people who stopped. There was a priest. There were lots of school kids, of course, commuting back and forth. Lots of writers, and there was a real marine scientist one day who stopped to chat with me, and he lives on the west side of San Juan Island and has those microphones that detect whale sounds, and he offered to send me scientific papers and things. So yeah, it really varied. And of course, I would see a lot of people that I knew too. I mean, I had worked on Orcas, so I knew people from Orcas and people from Lopez, going to the other islands. And usually when I explained to people what I was doing and they saw that I was set up there to work, they were really considerate and would just chat for a minute and then go on. So it was often kind of a nice break for me, and then I would just go back to my work.
Why don't you tell a little bit about what, after your term ended and getting applications for?
Yeah. Well, since I made this all up, this residency, and the contact that Ken gave me, was very supportive and fine with me doing this. And I had thought it would be fun to continue to do this and for other writers to have the opportunity if they wanted to. And so near the end of my one-year term, I did put out a call for people to apply to be the writer in residence, and the state ferry said that was fine to keep going with it. And gosh, I think about 12 people applied and explained, why they wanted to do it and what they wanted to do. So I went through those initial ones and narrowed it down to, I think, 3. And then I enlisted the help of my writing group to review those 3 that come up with the person that we selected. And it's a woman a writer from San Juan named Liz Smith, who's a documentary filmmaker. She started as the second writer in residence in August of 2019. And then we all know what happened in March of 2020. She was no longer riding on the ferry because they're sitting in the cabin of the ferry, riding and writing all day because we were in the midst of the pandemic. She has remained the writer in residence, and we're hopeful that soon she'll be able to start writing and writing again and maybe finish out until the summer, and we'll do another call for another writer in residence. So we'll see. She is a really inspiring writer. She is a documentary filmmaker and has written scripts and produced a number of documentary films, including one that is through National Geographic, I think, and it's the following 10 years since the Deepwater Horizon oil spill.
Oh, wow.
And then she was also the producer on a feature-length documentary film called Youth v. Gov. That's about the, I think it's 18 youth plaintiffs who brought a suit against the US government for not assuring clean air, water. And that's won a bunch of awards at film festivals, but I have yet to see it. But anyway,
Yeah.
she's doing some very exciting writing.
Okay, Kip had her hand up, and then
Iris, you have a beautiful map in your book.
Yes,
And I wondered if you could address how you got it and tell us a little bit about it.
oh, sure, happy to. I'm so glad you asked. So this is a map of the Salish Sea. It was made by Stefan Freeland, who I believe lives in Bellingham. And if you go to his website, he talks about how he did this map. It's also available in color, which is even better, but we needed to do a black and white version. And he has given permission to use this as long as you give him credit. And to me, it's just such a good representation of how vast the Salish Sea is. And as I said, there are many people who don't know. I mean, it's only had this name for about 20 years, and which is quite a story as well. I actually wrote a piece in the form of a petition, a legal petition for a name change to describe the history of it getting this name. And there, I think it's the CDOC Society did a little informal survey, and their conclusion is that about only 5% of Washingtonians know where the Salish Sea is. They actually did a little thing in downtown Seattle that they filmed of asking people there by Pike Place Market, can you tell me where do I get to the Salish? How do I get to the Salish Sea? And most people didn't know even where it was. Oh, well, I think maybe it's over there. I don't know. Anyway, so I'm fascinated with maps in general, and I just think this one is really, really a terrific one because it has, it just shows how it's all connected, how we're all connected.
Penny had his hand up in the back.
It's for the Zoom. Oh, the Zoom. Okay, that's Zoom.
Like an ice cream cone.
First of all, thank
I
you.
can't hear you.
I find your project really deeply moving. Thank you very much. And the other thing I wondered about, when you were sitting on the ferry and people were talking to you, were you able to engage them about the subject matter of your project? In other words, how do we save the Salish Sea? And especially since probably most of the people who were walking on were local, most of the people who were driving on were not. Were you able to engage the people who were driving on? Because, I was thinking about the crew celebrating now the sea is ours. And this is a big issue, right, for the health and survival of the Salish Sea. Were you able to engage people while you were writing on this issue? And what did they say?
I really didn't. the people that maybe, we did have some of that conversation, we're like-minded people. I didn't really test if there were people that, didn't have an awareness maybe of the threat to the Salish Sea. So maybe that'll be my next, my next residency and riding on the ferry. I mean, now that I have something that I could maybe put in people's hands, I think that was part of it too, is I was doing so much learning myself at that time. I was not feeling terribly secure in my own knowledge. I did take the Marine Naturalist Training Program through the Whale Museum, and if any of you ever have an opportunity to do that, I really recommend it. It's a 6-day course, and I just learned so much during that program. And that was during part of that time when I was the writer in residence. So that's, I feel like I was such a novice and still am, but I was really in such a learning mode myself that I didn't feel on very secure ground other than the emotional part at that time. So hopefully I've got a few more tools now.
I saw that Kate had her hand up. Darren is bringing you the microphone.
I have two questions, one silly one and one that I forgot. The silly one was, are there no men writers? Just call it a women's writing group. And the second one was the second question, which I remembered as soon as you said it. Was, did it bother you to have people up interrupting you when you're working? That was me. I can't stand it. I don't think I could have done that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
thank you.
You're welcome. Our writing group does happen to be all women, and we have maintained that. And part of that goes back to early days when we would go to a retreat on Shaw at a facility that was for women only, because we all slept together in an open dorm. And so we, just decided we would keep it that way. Like I said, people were really pretty respectful when I was on the ferry, and when I told them what I was doing, they didn't linger very long. No, I've forgotten what else you said about that. I just found it kind of a nice break. I would often ride for 4 to 6 hours on the ferry, and that's a long stretch for me to be that focused on my writing. So it was kind of a nice break sometimes when somebody would come along. And I also I didn't ride quite as much in the summertime. So when I rode, in the off season, there just weren't as many people and a lot of locals. It was kind of like, oh, there she is again. I wasn't very interesting anymore.
I saw one more question here. I don't know if that might be the last one.
There's a couple ones.
Iris, I've been thinking about the body of work, and looking at it, if this is the right sequence, the book that's about looking at artisanal hands, things, hands of people who make things. And then the book that is about the food of people locally being grown and turned into this beautiful bounty, and then looking for yourself at your own life, right? In hiking naked, and then looking at this sea that surrounds us and the people and the inhabitants above and below. So I am curious if you have started to think yet about what will you be observing and looking at next.
I've been thinking about how I should probably be thinking about that. It's really a discernment process for me with writing projects, and And so I'm kind of in the midst of that right now. And as happened with this, you know, sometimes it's a friend who comes along and asks me a question that stimulates something that I maybe hadn't even thought of. And so I'm just trying to stay open to that and do the work that it takes at this stage of a project to get it out into the world, which, you know, this is now 5 years since my last book. It means I'm 5 years older and 5 years less sharp memory and energy level. And I'm realizing that, you know, this part of the process takes a lot of focus and attention and work. And so that's where my attention is right now. Press releases, writing press releases and writing emails for events and that sort of thing. So I don't know, we'll see what comes next.
Malia said there are a couple of,
Yeah.
you have time for that.
Yeah, so it looks like we have two. Gene has raised his hand and I think would like to attempt to ask his question out loud. So
Great, go for it,
give it a
Jean.
try.
Yay, yay, yay. Iris, I want to congratulate you on a very enjoyable evening, but really on a book that's moving, memorable, well-written. And I want to thank you as a marine biologist retired and as a conservation biologist, an occupation from which you can never retire, for communicating the science in a way that can be understood, appreciated, and move people to action. Because scientists, surprisingly many can't write science. Even fewer can take that science and make it accessible to the public. And you have the unique skill to understand the science and then communicate it. And for this, you've really done us a great service. So I don't have a question, I just have applause.
Well, thank you so much, Dean. You know, one of my things that has awakened me in the night in recent months has been, oh boy, some marine biologist is going to really lay into me one of these times. So I will carry your words with me. And as Lauren and I were preparing, I did have this reflection of how my work as a nurse and mostly in public health, so much of that was education and translating, you know, sometimes very technical and frightening and confusing information for people. And I think that approach in my first career, you know, probably influenced the approach that I took with this book. So I'm really grateful to hear that from you, Jean. And I've heard that from other people who aren't as knowledgeable as Jean is, who, you know, have appreciated that I did that translating.
So another question on Zoom is from Janet Buttonweiser.
Oh,
And she says hi and says you have a great list of resources in the back of the book.
Yep.
What books do you recommend about climate change or otherwise?
oh gosh. Janet is a longtime writing friend. We went to the MFA program together, and now she's studying to be a lawyer. So thank you, Janet, for pointing that out. As I said, you know, there are lots of really fine things that have been written about the Salish Sea and about climate. And of course, no sooner did I put together this list and 5 more things came out. And I also included some podcasts, videos, organizations that are really involved in climate change work. Right off the top of my head, the CDOC Society book, The Jewel of the Salish Sea. I'm not sure if I've got that title right. Is just such a wealth of information about the Salish Sea. The Salish Sea, Jewel of the Pacific Northwest is the title. Joe Gatos and Audrey Delela Benedict, and incredible photographs. And then Linda Mapes' book that just came out last year, Orca Shared Waters, Shared Home, is quite a moving book that really tells a lot of the history of the Salish Sea and the Southern residents.
And it's a compelling read.
Yeah, it's really compelling. And then a new book that has just come out. I have just started reading. I think the title is The Intersectional Environmentalist, and I list that as one of the resources. A young woman in California is really looking at the intersection between the environment and racism, and I'm really looking to reading that one. So, thank you.
Well, I just want to let you know, Iris, that there are a lot of well wishes and kind words coming in the chat, which I'll leave up so you could come look at later if you want. But I think that's all we have time for this
Yes,
evening.
no, I think we've actually gone beyond the time. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Iris and Lorna, for facilitating this discussion. I think it's fantastic. And to the Zoom audience that joined us, there was, at one point I saw there were 60 people. So we have more than capacity that this library could hold. I'm glad that we could do this hybrid event. And I'm really, really thankful for you to read your work in front of us. I look around this room and I see thousands and thousands of words and they're silent. And you're breathing life back into this library again. And I hope we can have more of these events in the future and see your faces here again. But let's take one chance to thank our author.
Thanks to all of you on Zoom. We're going to end that part of the program, but for those of you who are here at the library, we there are books available, and we can chat a bit. And we actually I have a drawing for some prizes. So sorry, Zoom audience.
Well, one other thing, has anybody noticed that Iris's earrings?
Look at them. These are from my writing group. Found someone who could create earrings and make miniature books with the cover from my book, and you can even there's even pages. You can open up the pages. This is the very, very small type version. Such a sweet thing. Ooh, that's not a good thing. Wow. Thank you, everyone. And my lovely assistant, the naked hiker back here, is going to help. Still here. Hi, Sylvia. Hi, Stephanie. Hi, Tom. Hi, Steve. Okay. Well, let's see. Oh, there's Maggie. Hi, Maggie. Maggie's there. Oh my goodness. And Jen. Oh, there's so many people. Yes. And Polly.
Hi, Maggie.
Tom Rawson, he's gonna sing. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Bye. Oh, that's right. So what happened when you draw?
Yes, yes. Very much. And
Yeah, see, that's it.
right, so like immediately.
Good to see you again.
So that's why it's so funny that he like that. You guys. No. Well,
Oh, yeah.